The man who built a political empire on the perceived weakness of others was about to face a psychological indictment. Delivered not by a medical board, but by a congresswoman from Dallas who had turned his favorite insult, low IQ, into a weapon of mass political destruction. The skyline of Dallas was a jagged crown of glass and steel on that October night in 2025. But the real electricity was pulsing inside the convention hall. 50 million Americans were tuned in, anticipating a showdown that had transcended policy and entered the realm of a clinical intervention. For years, Donald Trump had wielded the low IQ label as a blunt force instrument, using it to diminish any woman of color who dared to challenge his narratives. But Jasmine Crockett, a woman who had spent her career in the trenches of the Texas legal system, knew that bullies only scream when they are terrified of the truth. By October 13, 2025, the shadow of the second Trump administration had grown long and erratic. Crockett didn't just counter-punch, she initiated a formal strike against the president's most guarded secret, his fitness to serve. She drafted an explosive letter to White House physician Captain Sean Barbabella, demanding clarity on observable cognitive decline and physical anomalies that the administration had tried to hide behind layers of spray tan and scripted bravado. She pointed to a July 2025 medical memorandum, the one indicating chronic venous insufficiency and a suspicious reliance on daily aspirin, and asked the question that silenced the White House press corps: if the president cannot recall fundamental constitutional responsibilities, why is he still signing executive orders? The Kitsch 10 drama of the evening reached a fever pitch as Crockett walked onto the stage. Not with a teleprompter, but with a folder that contained the president's own medical history and a record of his most recent stumbles. She wasn't just there to debate, she was there to serve a summons on his sanity. Trump, watching from a screen in a secure location, fidgeted with his tie, his face reddening as Crockett held up his own low IQ insults like evidence in a fraud trial. "You call me low IQ because I can count your failures." Crockett's voice cut through the air, sharp and unyielding. "But I'm not the one who ordered an airstrike on Iranian nuclear facilities in June 2025 without a single vote from Congress. I'm not the one who unilaterally declared war while the American people were still paying for your last trade war at the grocery store. The question isn't my IQ, Mr. President. The question is whether your cognitive decline has made you a national security threat." The auditorium, packed with voters who had seen their neighbors swept up in the president's mass deportation raids, sat in a silence that was heavy with the weight of recognized betrayal. They had watched the Operation Midnight Hammer in June, an unconstitutional strike on Fordow and Natanz that had brought the world to the brink of nuclear escalation. They had felt the Trump tax on every purchase. And now, they were watching a black woman from Texas ask if the man behind the desk was even aware of the damage he was causing. Trump's response was predictable, a digital storm of insults labeling her a radical star whose party was in big trouble. He called her a very low IQ person who was a gift to Republicans because her extremism would drive voters away. But Crockett had already anticipated the move. She had launched a campaign ad for the 2026 Senate race that used his own insults as a soundtrack, framing herself as the ultimate threat to his crumbling system. She wasn't running away from his fire, she was using it to light her own way to the Senate. Round 1 was a surgical strike on his fitness. And the receipts she held were no longer just about Walmart, they were about the survival of the Republic. As she concluded the first hour of her announcement, the applause was not the polite clapping of a political gathering, it was a roar of relief. For the first time, a candidate wasn't just asking for a vote, she was offering a defense against the financial and psychological extraction that had come to define the second Trump administration. She had laid the gauntlet down in the heart of Texas, challenging the man who never paid for his mistakes to finally face the bill. Round 1 was over, and for the first time in 78 years, the president found himself in a fight where his wealth and his lawyers couldn't silence the evidence of his own decline. The atmosphere intensified as she detailed the specifics of the Keep SNAP and WIC funded Act of 2025. While Trump played war games abroad, Over 3.5 million Texans were going hungry because his administration was illegally withholding food assistance funds. No president should hold hungry families hostage to play political games, Crockett declared, her voice resonating with the pain of millions. She wasn't just fighting for a seat, she was fighting for the dinner tables of America. The Dallas Gauntlet had been thrown, and the president was realizing that his favorite insult was now the anchor dragging down his own presidency. The legal indictment of Donald Trump's administration had moved from the abstract ledger of trade deficits to the physical and psychological reality of the man himself. By late 2025, Jasmine Crockett had transformed the political arena into a clinical examination room, forcing the nation to look beyond the spray tan and the bluster toward a documented record of decline. The second stage of the confrontation began on October 13, 2025, when Crockett issued a formal, explosive letter to White House physician Captain Sean Barbabella. This wasn't the standard partisan bickering the public had grown accustomed to, it was a targeted legal strike. She demanded a full accounting of the president's observable cognitive lapses and visible physical anomalies, specifically pointing to a July 2025 medical memorandum that indicated Trump was suffering from chronic venous insufficiency and a suspicious reliance on daily aspirin, a regimen usually discouraged for men his age without specific cardiovascular justifications. Standing on the steps of the Capitol, she spoke to 50 million digital eyes. If the man behind the resolute desk cannot recall the basic tenets of the Constitution he swore to protect, then we don't have a leader. We have a national security crisis of competence. Trump's reaction was a digital landslide of vitriol. He took to the airwaves, labeling Crockett the low IQ star of the Democratic Party and a radical extremist whose only talent was counting things that don't exist. He mocked her meticulously gathered 47 lies about tariffs and her demand for a cognitive exam. She's a very low IQ person, he boomed at a rally in Florida, the familiar insults echoing through the speakers. Maybe she should take the test. I aced it. The doctors said they've never seen anything like it. But she wouldn't know an elephant if it stepped on her Walmart shopping cart. Crockett did not flinch at the low IQ label. She treated it like a piece of kinetic energy, catching it and hurling it back with twice the force. On December 8, 2025, she officially launched her bid for the U.S. Senate in Texas with a campaign advertisement that left the political establishment in awe. The video featured no music, just the raw audio of Trump's own voice, his harsh, mocking, and aggressive tones calling her a threat and a danger. Crockett stood silent in the frame, arms crossed, smiling as the president's insults played on a loop. When the audio cut out, she delivered the final blow. If he's afraid of my IQ, imagine what he's afraid of in the Senate. The kitsch tin drama shifted to the theater of war. In June 2025, the administration had bypassed Congress to order surgical strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordow and Natanz. Trump heralded the 12-day war as a masterstroke of decisive strength, claiming he had totally obliterated the threat. Crockett, however, characterized the strikes as a unilateral declaration of war and a flagrant violation of the War Powers Act. She stood in the House Judiciary Committee, accusing the president of playing God with the lives of service members, to distract from the reality that American families were still paying for his failed trade policies at the grocery store. A president who cannot navigate a domestic budget without lying 47 times, she argued, is a president who will resort to missiles to maintain the illusion of power. As the winter of 2025 set in, the humanitarian crisis of the mass deportation initiative, a project costing taxpayers an estimated $315 billion over a decade, began to hollow out communities across Texas. Crockett stood at the gates of detention centers, apologizing to families torn apart by random kidnappings and ICE terror. She linked the cruelty of the deportations directly to the economic negligence of the administration, pointing out that while billions were being spent on man-hunting, over 3.5 million Texans were going without their November SNAP and WIC benefits. The administration had deliberately withheld already approved funding, a move Crockett slammed as holding hungry families hostage to play political games. She championed the Keep SNAP and WIC-funded Act of 2025, positioning herself as the only shield between the vulnerable and the administration's moral bankruptcy. By the time her Dallas rally ended, the Phoenix Effect had become an unstoppable national movement. Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman from Dallas, she was the front-runner for the U.S. Senate. Having cleared the path after former Representative Colin Allred withdrew from the race. She had turned the president's insults into her marketing and his policies into her indictments. The man who had mocked others for their weakness for 78 years was now facing a woman who was methodically proving that his own strength was a mirage. Round 2 was coming to a close. And the president was realizing that in Jasmine Crockett, he hadn't just found an opponent, he had found his reckoning in the heart of Texas. The investigation into Donald Trump's physical and mental fitness was no longer a legislative request. By late October 2025, it had become a national obsession. Jasmine Crockett had successfully shifted the spotlight from the president's televised bravado to the sterile, uncompromising reality of his medical records. She wasn't just questioning his memory, she was dissecting his biological capability to lead. The tension reached a breaking point when Crockett released a supplemental report highlighting the president's reliance on 81 milligrams of daily aspirin, a detail buried in the July 2025 memorandum from Captain Sean Barbabella. To the casual observer, it was a minor detail. But to a lawyer trained in meticulous discovery, it was a red flag. She pointed to the American College of Cardiology's guidelines, which explicitly cautioned against such a regimen for men of Trump's age without underlying heart disease. Unless there was a hidden risk of stroke the public was not being told about. "We are not looking for a fitness influencer," Crockett told a hushed chamber of the House. "We are looking for a commander-in-chief who isn't one blood clot away from a constitutional vacuum." The White House's response was a masterclass in panicked obfuscation. Physician Barbabella, once a fixture of transparency, went into a tactical silence. The low IQ insults flowing from Mar-a-Lago became increasingly desperate, focused less on policy and more on the physical appearance of his critics. Trump took to the stage in Pennsylvania, his face a shade of orange that couldn't hide the visible swelling in his lower extremities, a symptom Crockett's medical consultants had identified as chronic venous insufficiency. Every time the president shuffled his feet or grasped a podium for stability, the Crockett medical summons flashed on news tickers across the country. The visual evidence was beginning to match the legislative indictment. Crockett weaponized this medical silence with the precision of a surgeon. She held a press conference featuring a panel of independent geriatric specialists who analyzed the president's recent word salad speeches. They noted the frequent substitution of names, calling his own cabinet members by the names of rivals from the 1990s, and the sundowning effect visible in his late-night digital tirades. When the leader of the free world starts confusing his daughter with his former campaign manager at 2 a.m., Crockett remarked with biting sarcasm, "It's not a glitch in the matrix. It's a glitch in the prefrontal cortex." The drama intensified as the president's legal team attempted to quash the inquiry. Citing executive privilege over his biometric data, Crockett didn't flinch. She used the legal challenge as a platform to remind the 50 million viewers that a man who has nothing to hide doesn't hire a dozen lawyers to conceal his blood pressure readings. She was painting a picture of a hollowed-out presidency, a facade of strength held together by aspirin and spray tan, while the real decisions were being made by a shadowy circle of advisors. Round 3 was no longer about what the president said, it was about what his body was trying to hide. The receipts were no longer printed on paper, they were written in the tremors of his hands and the gaps in his memory. The fourth stage of the confrontation saw the political arena expand from the grocery store to the global theater of war. In June 2025, just as the Crockett medical summons was beginning to dominate the domestic news cycle, a massive explosion in the Middle East threatened to reset the entire national narrative. President Trump announced Operation Midnight Hammer, a unilateral, high-altitude bombing campaign targeting Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. While the president appeared in a televised address at 10 p.m. local time to declare that these sites had been totally obliterated, in a spectacular military success. Jasmine Crockett was not looking at the glowing satellite imagery. She was looking at the charred remains of the War Powers Act. In the feverish days following the strikes, as the world braced for a retaliatory nuclear crisis, Crockett staged a dramatic intervention on the House floor. She did not fall into the traditional trap of unquestioning patriotism. Instead, she framed the midnight hammer as a desperate act of distraction bombing. She alleged that the president had bypassed Congress not out of military necessity, but out of a psychological need to erase the headlines regarding his own cognitive decline. "He didn't bomb Iran to keep you safe," Crockett told a hushed gallery, her voice vibrating with a prosecutorial chill. "He bombed Iran to blow up the news cycle. He is playing God with the lives of our service members to mask the fact that he can no longer articulate the basic duties of his office. This is not a strategy, it is the reckless impulse of a man losing his grip on reality." The drama intensified as the human and economic costs of the 12-day war became undeniable. While Trump touted the obliteration of Fordow, Crockett pointed to the soaring fuel prices and the destabilization of the global energy market, which acted as a secondary Trump tax on every American driver. She linked the missiles abroad to the hunger at home, arguing that a president who unilaterally declares war is a president who views American lives as expendable pawns in a grand, televised game of toughness. She was the first to call it a unilateral declaration of war, citing the lack of a single congressional vote. She partnered with anti-interventionist Republicans in a rare, high-stakes alliance to curb the executive's military authority. "A man who cannot navigate a domestic budget without lying 47 times," she declared, "is a man who should never be allowed to press the button." The midnight hammer wasn't just a strike on Iran, it was a strike on the very concept of a constitutional republic. Jasmine Crockett had successfully transformed the victory of the Iran strikes into another receipt on the table. She had proven that whether it was a $135 grocery bill or a multi-billion-dollar airstrike, the pattern remained identical. Donald Trump makes the choices, and the American people, in blood and in dollars, always pay the bill. By November 2025, the Trump tax on imported goods had metastasized into a more direct and brutal form of economic extraction. While the president's focus remained on the midnight hammer and the grand theater of global dominance, a quiet, devastating crisis was being manufactured at the most basic level of American life, the dinner table. Jasmine Crockett, shifting her sights from the cockpit of fighter jets to the empty pantries of her constituents, prepared to expose the ultimate moral bankruptcy of the administration. The drama centered on a calculated executive freeze, on the orders of the White House, billions in already approved funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, and the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, WIC, were withheld. The administration framed it as a fiscal sanity check, but the reality on the ground was immediate and visceral. Across the nation, 42 million Americans found themselves in a state of sudden, artificial starvation. In Texas alone, 3.5 million citizens, seniors, veterans, and children, went into the Thanksgiving season without their November benefits. Crockett did not merely condemn the move, she turned it into a legal and moral indictment. She co-introduced the Keep SNAP and WIC Funded Act of 2025, a piece of emergency legislation designed to pry the president's hands off the nation's food supply. No president should be able to hold hungry families hostage because they want to play political games, she declared in a fiery press conference that went viral. She told stories of Texas parents skipping meals so their children could eat and seniors in her district rationing canned goods because the digital balance on their EBT cards read zero. Sparse cupboards are the new America First reality, she mocked with biting sarcasm. He's starving children and seniors to pay for a trade war he's losing. The drama of the hunger crisis was intensified by its collision with the administration's mass deportation initiative. The Project 2025 inspired raids had escalated into what Crockett described as random kidnappings. In a powerful committee hearing, she delivered a full, unprecedented apology on behalf of the United States government to the families terrorized by the ICE regime. She linked the two policies, arguing that the $315 billion projected cost of mass deportations was being clawed back from the stomachs of American citizens. While the president built tent camps at Fort Bliss to house thousands of detainees at a cost of $1.26 billion, he was refusing to release the funds that kept the local grocery stores in Dallas and El Paso functioning. "This is not about security, it's about profit and cruelty," Crockett shouted from the House floor, holding up a photograph of the sprawling tent structures. "You are spending billions to cage human beings while 3 million Texans are wondering where their next meal is coming from. That's not a policy, that's a crime against humanity." The president's response was a desperate attempt to maintain his alpha persona. He dismissed the hunger crisis as fake news and blamed Democrat obstruction for the very funds he had personally frozen. He doubled down on his low IQ attacks, calling Crockett a radical who cared more about illegal aliens than American taxpayers. But the low IQ person from Dallas was proving to be a tactical genius. She had successfully framed the 2026 Senate race not as a choice between parties, but as a choice between a president who weaponized hunger and a leader who fought for the basic right to survive. Round 5 was a reckoning for the soul of the country, and Jasmine Crockett was ensuring that every empty refrigerator in Texas was a receipt in her favor. The tactical war between Mar-a-Lago and the heart of Texas reached a seismic peak in December 2025. By now, the insults from Donald Trump were no longer just noise, they were being harvested by Jasmine Crockett as high-grade political fuel. On December 8, standing before a sea of supporters at the Frederick Douglass Human Services and Justice Center in Dallas, Crockett finally did what the administration had been dreading. She officially declared her candidacy for the United States Senate. The launch was not a standard political affair, it was a psychological counter-ambush. The event began with a campaign advertisement that left the political establishment stunned. It contained no soft music, no waving flags, and no polished oratory. Instead, it opened with the raw, grating audio of Donald Trump's own voice, his harsh, mocking, and aggressive tones calling her a threat, a danger, and a very low IQ person. While his voice echoed through the hall, Crockett stood silent in the frame of the video, arms crossed, smiling with the calm of a predator who had finally lured its target into the open. When the audio cut out, she spoke to the 50 million viewers who had followed her since Phoenix. "He calls me a threat because I can count his failures. He calls me a gift because he thinks Texas is his playground. He's right about the threat, but he's dead wrong about the gift." The political dominoes fell with stunning speed. Only hours before Crockett filed her paperwork, former NFL star and Dallas Congressman Colin Allred, the man most expected to be the Democratic nominee, officially withdrew from the race. Sensing the undeniable Phoenix effect, and wishing to avoid a bruising primary that would only empower Trump's narrative, Allred stepped aside, clearing the path for Crockett to become the singular face of the resistance in Texas. Trump's response, delivered from the steps of Air Force One as he departed for a rally in Pennsylvania, was an attempt at casual dismissal that felt increasingly desperate. He told a huddle of reporters that Crockett's Senate run was a gift to Republicans. Doubling down on his rhetoric, "She's a very low IQ person. I can't imagine she wins. I've watched her for the last 2 years. I can't even believe she's a politician." Actually, he framed her candidacy as a sign that the Democratic Party was being run by radical leftists. Unaware that every syllable was being converted into small dollar donations, many totaling exactly $47, hitting her campaign account in a digital deluge. The drama of the evening intensified when Crockett addressed the gift remark directly. "If he thinks I'm a gift, he clearly hasn't looked at the bill I'm bringing with me," she shouted over the roar of a crowd that spilled out of the center and into the cold Dallas night. She linked the president's personal insults to his policy failures, arguing that a man who mocks a black woman's IQ while losing $156 billion of the people's money in a tariff war is a man who is terrified of the final accounting. "He's calling me a gift because he wants you to laugh so you don't look at your grocery receipt. But in Texas, we're not laughing, we're counting." As the first day of her Senate run came to a close, the shift in energy was undeniable. Crockett had successfully weaponized Trump's own midnight hammer rhetoric against him, turning his aggression into the staircase for her ascent. She had cleared the field, shattered fundraising records, and forced the president into a defensive posture in a state he had once considered safe. Round Sao was over, and as the low IQ person from Dallas officially became the front runner for the Senate, the president was left staring at a campaign that his money couldn't buy and his insults couldn't stop. The silence of Phoenix had been replaced by a deafening roar in Dallas, a sonic wave that signaled the end of the defensive era. By mid-December 2025, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman, she was a seismic event. On December 8, standing in a crowded gymnasium at the Frederick Douglass Center, she officially delivered the final bill for 78 years of unpaid accountability. The drama of the launch was built on a series of historic political dominoes. Just hours before her announcement, former NFL star and fellow Dallas Congressman Colin Allred, the man the establishment had bet on, officially surrendered his bid for the Senate. He chose the newly drawn 33rd Congressional District instead, effectively clearing the runway for Crockett to become the singular, high-velocity face of the resistance in Texas. In that moment, the Phoenix effect reached its critical mass. Crockett walked onto the stage not just as a candidate, but as a predator who had already cleared the jungle. Her introduction was a psychological counter-ambush. The event didn't begin with a speech, but with a video montage that turned the president's own verbal weapons against him. Their new star, Crockett, Trump's rasping, mocking voice echoed through the gym. "She's a very low IQ person. I can't imagine she wins. I think it's a gift to Republicans." Crockett stood silent in the frame, arms crossed, smiling with the cold confidence of a prosecutor who had already heard the jury's verdict. When the audio cut out, she spoke to the 1.600 people in the room and the 50 million watching on their screens. "If a man who is currently picking your pocket calls me a gift, it's because he's terrified of the bill I'm bringing with me to the Senate. I'm Jasmine Crockett, and the gloves aren't just off, I'm in the ring. And I'm taking his throne." Trump's reaction, delivered from the steps of Air Force One on December 9, was a frantic attempt to re-establish the alpha narrative. He told reporters she was a terrible representative and a radical extremist, whom he couldn't believe was even a politician. But the low IQ label, his favorite blunt force instrument for 78 years, was finally broken. It had been priced into her brand. For every insult he hurled, Crockett fired back with a surgical precision that targeted his Republican enablers. She turned her focus to incumbent Senator John Cornyn, mocking his 99% voting record with Trump. "You used to denounce the wall, John. You used to speak out against him. What happened? You spent your career bending the knee and kissing the ring. You told everyone you vote 99% of the time with Trump. Well, John, I'm here to tell you, you have a 1% problem. And that 1% is about to cost you your job." The Dallas Gauntlet had officially transformed the 2026 midterm into a national referendum on sanity. Within 48 hours of her announcement, a Texas Southern University poll showed Crockett already leading her remaining primary rival, James Tallarico, 51% to 43%, fueled by a near-unanimous 89% support among black voters. The gift to Republicans that Trump had mocked was proving to be a Trojan horse of record-breaking grassroots fundraising. Thousands of digital donations hit her account, many totaling exactly $47, a relentless, mathematical reminder of the 47 lies she had documented about his tariffs. As she concluded her final speech of the week, Crockett held up the Walmart receipt from Phoenix, now yellowed but preserved like a holy relic. "He says he's making America great. I say he's making America broke," she shouted, her voice carrying out to the thousands standing in the biting December wind. "He promises someone else will pay. But we have the receipts. We have the medical summons. We have the 3.500 lawsuits. And tonight, we have the courage to say, no more. The bill is due, Donald, and Texas is here to collect." The sound that followed was not just applause, it was the sound of a country finally refusing to pay for one man's mistakes. Jasmine Crockett walked off the stage, leaving Donald Trump alone in the silence of his own making, facing a woman who had turned his insults into her marketing and his arrogance into her victory. The con was over. The 1% problem was now a 100% reality. The bill had finally stopped.